Okay, good afternoon, everybody. These sessions are running a little bit long. Hopefully I will stay within my time frame. And so fleet maintenance, we're going to cover two big areas here, essential building blocks of fleet maintenance, and then some of the day in and day out use of it. Some of the building blocks are equipment and vehicles, parts that you use and consume, the employees that represent your mechanics, outside contractors and vendors who provide services and provide parts. The concept of a PM item, we're going to look at that. And also what we call the data entry expediter, the part kit, we're going to look at that as well. These are all things you want to set up in advance. They don't have to all be set up in advance. PubWorks is a very evolutionary system. It will morph as you change the way you do business, but it's very flexible that way. But essentially, you need to have some starter data in order to make some progress. So we'll look at some of these. We'll look at all these items. And then on the day in and day out use side of the presentation, we'll look at some of the workflow. Perhaps I've constructed a very loose, generic workflow, starting with a fleet service request, turning that into a fleet work order. We're going to cover the perhaps little known concept of fleet activities. We'll look at the work order status screen to see where we stand with our work orders and what they cost and how many we have. We'll take a look at the dashboard. It's a nice data visualization tool. The key element here in the process of day in and day out use is the fuel and odometer log, where we'll import fueling transactions from your fuel system. We'll look at some reporting options along the way. And at the end of the presentation, we'll look at some of those as well. And then at the end as well, we'll look at some settings and configuration options so that you can have some customer specific efficiency, tweak the system, dial the system into the way you want to do things. You know, over here on the left, we've got fleet service requests, and they can be converted into a fleet work order here in the middle. And then on top, the fleet work order is fed by your parts inventory, your labor sources in the form of your mechanics and employees. And of course, all that work that's being performed is on your vehicle and equipment inventory. We've got a PM schedule that will allow for a nice cycle of performing work and running the PM schedule to see what's due for service, and then actually executing those services and cycling through that process. And part of that process is fed by the dates and odometer readings that come in from the fuel log. So we'll look at all that great stuff. So one of the essential building blocks, building block number one, essential building block number one is your equipment inventory, your vehicle and equipment inventory. And on the fleet menu, down here about a quarter of the way down, you'll see how our categorization is at work. We're categorizing vehicles and equipment based on equipment type. And this is a nice method that we're putting to use here. This equipment type categorization lets you see the classes of vehicles that you have. And it tells you as well how many you do have. So right from here, I know that I've got 13 motor graders and 41 pickup trucks and 8 rollers and 7 tractor mowers, et cetera, and so on. So those numbers there are the count of vehicles within each one of those equipment type classes. And that automatically is organized by the software based on how you set up your data. And we'll take a look at that shortly. If we go to right here in the middle, pickup trucks, everybody, I assume, has pickup trucks. So it's a rather familiar item, I hope. We've taken advantage of some conventions where yellow fields, the background color yellow is mandatory, white is optional. We're using blue ink in a number of places to show fields that are actually calculated or pushed into the program by the software. They're read-only fields, I should say. And on the left-hand side here, we've got a whole wide variety of standard attributes for vehicles and equipment. A unit number, a make and a model, gross vehicle weight, vehicle ID, plate, license plate number, a wide variety of items here. If you'll notice too, as I move from field to field, the orange tracer is following me around. Also, it's never enough to emphasize that many of the fields have tooltips. If you just mouse over them, that tooltip will tell you what that field is about, how to make best use of it. Up here on the upper right-hand side of the screen, And today the same. I'm not drawing a very good box there, but these 8 drop-down lists represent ways for you to categorize your vehicle and equipment records. And the values in these lists, of course, are all customer defined. You folks decide what is going to appear in these drop-down lists. And actually getting those drop-down lists established is an admin function. And let's just take a little sidebar, a little journey over to where some of these items are found in PubWorks. So equipment type and department, let's take a look at those two. They're found off the PubWorks data menu. At the very bottom, we've got something called category data. And from there, a submenu appears, and alphabetically, you'll see equipment types or departments at the top, near the top. So if we look at equipment types, for example, we get a very simple, move it to the center, a very simple blue and white grid, sizable screen, where you can enter an abbreviation, a code, if you will, and a name, a description for that class of vehicle. And these can be changed at any time by admin users. And they're used for, they have 2 primary purposes. They let you better organize your data, and more practically, perhaps, they provide terrific reporting power. And we'll see how those manifest a little bit later. It's a very simple screen. When you need to enter a new value, you come to the end of that list, type in the new value XYZ, user, conference, example. I typed it in all uppercase. You could type it in mixed case, however you wish. But now that entry's in there. You just type it in the row, click someplace else on the blue and white grid, or just close the screen or click the save button at the bottom, and that item is in the system. If you come back to that item and you need to change it, for example, you don't like the way example is spelled, just change it and close the screen, and that item will be saved. So if you wanted to delete that, you would click on the row and click the delete button at the bottom. Software will always ask you, are you sure if you wish to delete this? And once you say yes, that item is deleted. There's no undelete once it's been deleted. But if that item was connected to some other records in the system, PubWorks would not permit the delete. It would make that record inactive. It's called referential integrity for you techies out there. And it prevents a hole from being ripped into the database, which would be very bad for your integrity. All right, so enough of the lecture. Let's go back to the equipment screen. Again, many standard attributes here. We've got job costing attributes here in the middle for primary cost rate, either by the hour or by the mile, a secondary cost rate. This was introduced to the system many, many years ago. We had a request from a customer who said, well, you know, when we use this vehicle for our internal use, it costs X. When we use it to take care of some of the townships in our county, we want to charge them Y. So you can establish multiple rates for a vehicle, and then the all-important FEMA rate, which we can help you insert into PubWorks in accord with the FEMA code over here on the left-hand side. So those are some key attributes. Odometer settings are important. The primary odometer, secondary odometer are these meters set up by the hour or by the mile. So those are some settings that you should be paying attention to with regard to fleet maintenance in particular. Down at the bottom in all this blue ink, we're showing a utilization summary. We're showing how many hours or miles that vehicle has been used for, what it cost us to operate that vehicle, and if we've got fuel and odometer readings, we'll have some mile per gallon readings as well. So for this item, we don't have a lot of current data because we're going to import the 2017 fueling transaction. So right now that's blank, but we do have a life-to-date mile per gallon of a whopping 95 miles per gallon. It's pretty darn good. You know, PubWorks is an asset management system, so there are several data fields on the screen to support some very nice asset management functions, some of which we'll take a look at from a reporting perspective a little bit later. So for example, we've got an acquisition date, we've got an in-service date, a disposal date, a replacement year, a replacement odometer. We've got original cost, we've got replacement cost. And maybe some of you are curious about these calculator buttons here. If you were to click that calculate button, you'd be able to project back in time, in this case, based on consumer price index or an inflation metric, what that vehicle might have cost based on the current cost of the vehicle. Conversely, you can calculate a replacement cost based on the original cost. I'll just do this and I'll say, well, our original cost was $23,000. The average inflation rate, let's just say it's 3%, which it's not. It's actually lower. Let's go 2.5 just for grins. Our original acquisition date was 2006, and our replacement year is 2026. And if I click the calculate button, it does some magic and figures out that based on that inflation rate, a $23,000 vehicle in 2006 probably is going to cost around $37,688 in 2026. And that number is in blue, so it's been calculated. It's read-only, but I can apply that. I can push that right onto the equipment screen by clicking the apply button. And you can see that that number has been updated. There's a scrap value. There's a depreciation tab that lets you depreciate that item. Very easy to operate. Make a couple of selections, click the create schedule button, and voila, you'll have a depreciation schedule. So I'm going to recreate mine just to update it, and there you go. Back to the general info tab. We've got a very nice little feature here. It's called a chart, and it sort of looks at how that vehicle is sort of depreciating in cost and where the cumulative maintenance threshold is. So you see how our depreciation, that vehicle's value is going down, and the maintenance costs are going up. So right there where those two lines cross in the year 2020, that might be a good time to think about ditching the vehicle and getting a replacement. So, you know, another thing that's very important in any software product, product like ours in particular, is date fields. We've got date fields everywhere, and you know, we use software products too, and sometimes date fields really make your life a little more difficult than it should be. When you're in PubWorks and you want to enter a date, you could type in the date in the long grand format like 01/04/2014, or you can abbreviate that if you wish with a 1/1/14. When you move off of the field just by hitting the tab key or clicking somewhere else, PubWorks will format that for you in a full-on format. Or you can be in that date field, double click, get a calendar, make any selection you wish. You can move up and down with arrow keys. I'm just hitting my arrow keys on my laptop, and that's going to move up and down. Or for example, if that registration is expiring, let's just say it's expiring on Christmas Day, I can just type in 12/25, ignoring the year entirely. This is an idea we picked up from Microsoft Excel. And if you just move off of that date field, that year will be plugged in for you automatically. So there's a lot of flexibility with the format and the data entry on these date fields. We hope that you take advantage of that, and it makes it just a wee bit easier. Looking back at these categorization drop-down lists, again, those are admin functions. We did that little sidebar. Some of them are not, like, for example, operator. That's going to be a list of your employees who might be using that vehicle most of the time. There's also a fund drop-down list where we can account for the cost of that vehicle on a fund basis. But the rest of them, well, shop location as well as where we're storing that vehicle, where it operates out of. So these three, the operator, shop location, and fund, are not truly categorization items, but the rest of them are, and they're found on that category data item, data menu, or on the fleet menu. We've got some additional ones for vehicle class, vehicle condition, and what was the other one? No, those are the two. So take a look at those, make use of those. Again, they provide really nice organization. For example, from an organizational standpoint, if I spread my screen out, this sizable screen out, and go to the list view, you know, I can click on these column headings, and the fact that my pickup trucks are all departmentalized, I can sort them on that basis. If I scroll out a little further, there's the fund column. That's sort of another categorization method. And there's some additional ones out there to the right. You can, really see a lot of data, a lot of visibility here for the data. So that's an organizational technique, but really their real bang for the buck is when you run reports and you get filtering and grouping capabilities from that category setup. Just to review, our equipment and vehicle screen is multi-tab. So there's a tab for depreciation. There's a tab to look at odometer readings, fuel and odometer readings that you've brought in perhaps from Fuel Master or Gas Boy. There is a fleet work order log tab that shows you the complete history of maintenance performed on the vehicle. Some of these grids or some of these tabs have some summary fields at the bottom where in blue certain values are summarized. Here, quantity of fuel and cost of fuel used are summarized for you in blue. On the fleet work order log tab at the bottom, total maintenance costs, parts and labor are summarized in blue. But in addition, there are some radio buttons here that allow you to change your time frame. The default time frame is the custom radio button. And right now, when I click on it, it shows me nothing because my custom date range is set to August of 2017. And once you make this setting, this custom date range filter, which is established on a user-by-user basis, follows you around to every screen in the system. So it's a good idea to know how to use this. When you set a fixed date range like this might cause you some headaches here and there because you'll look for data and you won't find it until you remember that, oh yeah, my custom date range filter is set for April 1st, 2004. So you need to keep this in mind. But a great way, I think, to make use of this is to use, instead of a fixed window in time, use the by last X days option to create a sliding window in time. So perhaps I look at the last 365 days, the last sliding window of time being a year in encapsulation there. So once I make that selection, I get some data on this screen. And now that my custom date range filter is set in every screen I go to, and that when that setting is available, it's going to be looking at the last 365 days worth of data. So please keep that in mind. So we're looking at, and one other thing I want to point out, I'm not sure if this is clear. When we look at this equipment record for this unit 1014, which is a Chevy 2500 pickup truck, that's very much prominent in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. It's also on the title bar here, the blue title bar. It's also repeated down here on the status bar at the very bottom. And that title bar and status bar at the bottom, they frame the information. So when I go to the depreciation schedule, there's really no mention of the fact that this depreciation schedule is for unit 1014. That information is on the title bar. It's also on the status bar. And that's also true as I move from tab to tab. That static information about the vehicle that we're positioned on is in the title and status bars. It won't be found in these grids because it would just be a redundant column. It would just show unit 1014 and nothing else. It would be cluttering up the screen, consuming what would otherwise be valuable real estate. So there's an odometer log tab for the history of fueling transactions. These grids have column click sorting. You can click on the column headers to get the data to sort, double click on a row to either navigate to someplace else in the system or give you the ability to edit the record on which you clicked, double clicked, I should say. Here's the fleet work order log tab. If I double click on one of these rows, it brings up the fleet work order itself. There's a service request, fleet service request log tab. Again, double click will bring up that service request log. And these are very nice features. This is sort of when you think about the World Wide Web and you go onto your Internet Explorer and you're browsing around, sort of mechanism is manifested by the fact that you can click on these hyperlinks and it'll take you to that story in the New York Times, and next thing you know, you're reading about the Mississippi River, and then you're reading about O. Henry or Mark Twain or something like that. You're browsing around, and it's just sort of, I wouldn't say it's random, but it's this surfing that you do, and that navigation makes web browsing really easy and very natural. And we're trying to mimic that by providing the double-click navigation, the double-click locate from these grids. And we also have built a wide number of, or a large number of hyperlinks in PubWorks, and we'll look at some of those later as well. What's cool about PubWorks, if you're using it for fleet work orders and for job costing out in the field, you can see that for this vehicle, there's an activity log which shows us where that vehicle was used in the field. So as a fleet manager, you might look at both of those things together and wondering why this fellow is getting so many flat tires, or why the vehicle's out of alignment all the time. And you could perhaps look at this activity log and see that that vehicle might not be used for the appropriate job. And as a result of that, that vehicle's taking a beating. So all these hunks of data in one place, a very nice feature. The list view is just simply a list of all the vehicles you have on file. Again, column click sorting to rearrange things, and then double click on a row, and that will take you to that item on which you double click. And once you get to that item, now I'm on unit 1890, all the interior tabs have adjusted automatically and appropriately to show you the data for unit 1890 as opposed to unit 1014 that we were looking at originally. The very top of the screen is the button bar. The button bar is, let me just go back to my original vehicle.
Pete, real quick.
Yes.
Sorry. A question has come in. Sorry to interrupt. Where do you need to go to get the vehicle replacement graphic chart?
Well, you bring up the vehicle record like I have here, and down here at the bottom, there's this button called Chart.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so just quickly, I'll cover some of these buttons. Some of them should be rather obvious: first, next, previous, last, moving record to record, turning pages in a book, so to speak. When you need to add a new record, it's add new. If you've made any changes, it's save or cancel. If you want to dispose of a record, delete a record, click that delete button. Not all users have that power. Not all users have the power to add or modify, for that matter. But once you ask PubWorks to delete something, it's going to check to make certain it's not tied to anything else. And if it is tied to something, it will not delete it. It will make it inactive. I'm getting a notice here that my internet is not doing so great, so I'm hoping you can still hear me. Ellen, let me know if I'm still audible.
I can hear you.
Okay, let's hope everybody else can. Some of the key buttons here, the reports button. So what do you get when you click the reports button? You get a reports menu, and there's some report options here. So equipment use reports, this is a job costing set of reports, but there's some other reports perhaps that haven't been very often explored. For example, just simple listing reports. So you've got a number of radio button choices. You've got drop-down list filters, and this is where that categorization can really be powerful. So maybe I just want a list of my pickup trucks that belong to the road and bridge department, and I want a simple listing of those items. And there it is. Let me just make that 122% and see if you can see that a little bit better. So that's that listing report. As hopefully you've seen in other demonstrations over the last couple of days, these reports are exportable to PDF or Excel, a number of other formats. So you can play around with these items. There's also some search, some wildcard search. So maybe I want to see all the pickup trucks that are Fords. So I type in FORD there, and that gives me a slightly different listing. So it's also giving me some cost, some original cost information here and summarizing that there at the bottom of that listing. So we urge you to experiment with these things and play with them. It's the best way to learn. We can talk all day about how to ride a bike, but that's not going to help you very much. There's another set of reports called equipment replacement reports. Not certain if these get a lot of play, but they're taking advantage of some of those asset management fields that we've set up on the equipment record, like, for example, replacement year. So let me just run a replacement report based on replacement year, and you've got, you know, a drop-down list of what we call operators. So you can say, you know, everything less than 2017, or show me everything that's equal to 2018 or between 2 years. And I'm going to say, just show me replacement candidates only. And I will click that, and I'll get a list, very quickly, a list of all the vehicles that we need to replace in the year 2018. And it's grouped by department. Grouping is different than filtering. Grouping is sort of a very high level way that records are sorted. So we can see our primary grouping is by department, and then we're sorting within that group, showing individual equipment items. Let's see. So there's some reporting options here. We don't have the time to cover them all, but I urge folks to work with these on their own, and if you've got questions, our help desk will be happy to answer them. The next thing we should look at here is the locate button. If you've got many items in your vehicle equipment inventory, finding them, finding those needles in the haystack will be very important to you. So our locate screen, hopefully a lot of folks have experience with this. It uses that search box here to perform a wildcard search by virtue of the fact that this any part of field radio button has been selected. But you've got some options here. You could say, well, just, you know, base that wildcard on the start of the start of the field, or the exact value of what I type. So for example, if I type in the word, if I'm trying to find a Ford F-150, maybe I type in 150, and you can see that I'm finding a whole bunch of 150s. I'm finding the Dodge 1500, I'm finding the GMC Sierra 1500. Well, that's really not what I want. So let me type in Ford instead, and I'm finding Ford F-250s and Ford F-150s. Maybe I just type in F-150, and I found all my Ford F-150s. Now, when you type something into that field, into that search field, in any part of PubWorks, it works the same. All the columns that are displayed in the results grid, these are all being searched. These are all being searched for that text that you typed in. We're doing a wildcard search in the case where we're looking at any part of the field. We're doing a wildcard search on all of those items. So it gives you, you know, you're casting a very wide net. Type in something, and you may not get the exact match, but you'll get a close match, and you'll be able to identify that item. And once that item is identified, it appears in this grid, and the grid is an expandable screen. So if your results are, you know, 27 items instead of here just 7, you'll be able to see them all. And once you double click on one of those rows, bammo, it takes you right to that record that you found. Two other things quickly, the More button. Hopefully a lot of folks know about this More button, but it's a way to attach documents and date stamp notes to a vehicle record. If you've got a PDF of the sticker price or the spec sheet or a photograph, in this case, I've got a photograph of this vehicle, you can display that, and you can connect that. Boy, that's not the one I wanted. Let me go back to the first one. I spent time this morning getting this teed up. So got a Chevy 2500 here. Just click that display button, and there's that 2006 Chevy 2500. Pretty good shape for a 10-year-old rig. So these are very handy tools. There's also a specs button in case you really want to highly define all the features and attributes of the vehicle. There's lots of fields for fuel choices and different kinds of parts that you might use. There's a connection to the PM items that are established for this particular vehicle. a list of any special required parts for this vehicle, and then there's a notes section over here as well. One of the fields that we'll see a little later in the demonstration is or the use of the field is this mile per gallon range here. So you can specify a mile per gallon range. So when we run a specific report, what we call the MPG report, it'll find exceptions, it'll find outliers, and allow you to flag certain activities perhaps that aren't really supposed to be taking place. All right, so that's building block number one. Maybe I went a little too long on that, but I'll try to speed things up. The second building block, you've got your equipment and vehicles. The second item is parts. So right here in the middle of the fleet menu is parts. And parts has another quasi-dynamic menu that lets you look at either your stock parts or your non-stock parts individually, or as individual groups, or all of them together. So I'm just going to go to all. Same screen design, just like your steering wheel and brake pedal and gas pedal in your car. Same design. They work all the same. They look all the same. And they work. They make it easier for you to learn how to use new screens as you grow and work with the software. So part number, we got a part description. We've got a categorization mechanism called part type. It's a admin function that you would set up. You create these part types so that you can segregate parts into big groups, small groups, whatever. I've got some wiper blades set up. We can establish a shop location, aisle, shelf, and bin. We can designate primary and secondary vendor. We can also tie this part to a fund. We've got some additional part number and code fields down here for external code, which really we haven't seen used too much except for when we're tying into a fueling system. A lot of time these fueling systems use 1 for unleaded gas and 2 for diesel, but those kinds of codes are rather cryptic and not very self-explanatory. So we use that external code to tie into an external system, hence the name external code. A lot of parts come with various part numbers. The vendor part number could come with an alias, might have a UPC or barcode number. We can handle all these. When you search for parts, we're searching all of these fields for whatever you type in. And if you're making use of a barcode reader and use that barcode UPC number, PubWorks on a fleet work order will translate that barcode into the actual part number for you and insert it right onto the fleet work order automatically. The key element here is the status checkboxes at the bottom. There's a stock item checkbox right here. I'll draw a line next to it. And that's how we know whether this is a stock item or a non-stock item. So stock items are meant to represent items, parts that you use frequently, you purchase and store and put on your shelves. Non-stock items are those one-off things that you're just getting from Napa or AutoZone as you need them, sort of on demand, just in time, and you're really not managing an inventory of those things. But in PubWorks, both of those types of items are placed in the computerized inventory, but they are distinguished by this very simple very simple checkbox right there. On the right-hand side of the screen is what we call the inventory snapshot, inventory status perhaps. We're showing a quantity on hand. We're showing the last time we updated that part, average cost, last price paid. There might be a FEMA rate associated with this item. There could be a minimum quantity and a reorder quantity that you can use in a reorder report. We'll take a look at that shortly. There's also a way to in a very structured and formal way, modify your inventory with additions or transfers, returns to a vendor, or adjustment based on inventory counts that you've physically performed. So perhaps we should take a look at one or two of those. For this particular Bosch wiper blade here, I've created a number of transactions, and they appear on this tab called the transaction log. It's got a little asterisk right there above right of the G. And when you click on that tab, it's an indicator, that asterisk indicator, it tells you that there's actually something to see in the blue and white grid. And there is. There's 5 transaction records there. 5, I know it's 5. I don't have to count them, it tells me. And these are some additions and some adjustments, a return that we've performed on this particular inventory item. And it's a pretty easy process to get these done. There's 4 buttons. There's an add to inventory button, and when you click that, PubWorks knows what product or part you're on, what your part you're looking at, and it assumes that's the one you want to operate on right now. But you could change that. You could select any part from the drop-down list, either by description or by number. It knows what who the vendors are. You can say, I want to use my primary vendor or my secondary vendor. It knows what fund the monies are coming from. And here in the yellow fields in the middle, you would just say, well, I'm buying a gross of them, 144, and they cost, $10.75 each. Or maybe I do it by the shipment, and I say, well, that shipment cost me, $1,400.95. So we can go a number of ways. Now PubWorks will calculate the unit cost if you put the transaction in by the shipment. But let me just go back to the unit cost. So let's just say this item costs $12.22. You can, at the bottom here, specify a purchase order number or an invoice number from your vendor, or put a comment in there. And then once you save that, that transaction item is entered. It's added to the list. They display themselves in reverse chronological order, and your inventory on hand has been updated, and you're good to go. So the same mechanism is in place for a transfer from one shop to another. I'm moving these oil filters from the east shop to the west shop. I'm performing a return because the stuff I bought from Napa was all defective, or I went out and did a physical inventory count, and we noticed that there were only 100 items on the shelf instead of 101 items on the shelf. So we'll put in a formal adjustment to make our inventory count correct. So very nice tools here. And there's a number of reports that will let you slice and dice and analyze this information as you go forward. Similar to some of the equipment tabs, we've got a fleet work order log tab. So this shows us where this part has been used and on what vehicles and which work orders and when. And again, columns click sorting. We've got date range filtering with the radio buttons at the bottom. You can double click on a row to go right directly to that fleet work order, make edits or additions if you wish. So a lot of navigational flexibility here. The locate button, the list view on the right-hand side, this just gives you a list and a big sort of blue and white spreadsheet of all the parts you have on file. Column click sorting, double click locate, same as everywhere else. The buttons at the top of the screen on the button bar, they work just like everywhere else. The locate button will do a very extensive search. So if I type in the word, for example, wiper, it's finding 34 items. And as I mentioned before, this is a sizable screen. So you can get a lot of visibility here and see all the different wiper blades you've got. And then once you double click on one of those rows, it takes you right there. If I go back to that locate, let's do a wiper search again. We're searching a lot of fields here. We're searching the part number field, its description. We're searching the vendor part number, the external code, an alias, a UPC. So there's a lot, all the columns that you see displayed, they're all being searched for that particular value I've typed in there. I can use a barcode scanner to do a locate. So I've got my handy barcode scanner here. Maybe I'll.
Pete, do you have a couple minutes to answer some questions?
Yes, I do. You bet.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Going back a few minutes, when entering new equipment in the name field, why can't we have the same name? For example, we have purchased multiple new trucks and have to change the name in the name field to something different for each truck, even though they are the same make and model.
Yes, here's why. Because PubWorks allows customers to select vehicles and equipment, not just by the unit number, but also by its name. So long ago, we decided to make that vehicle name unique as well. So to get around that problem, if you've got a vehicle, if you've got 27 Ford F-250s, you can just append the unit number to the vehicle name and you'll be guaranteed uniqueness. But basically it goes back to what I said originally, is that in the activity screens, in the fleet work order screens, instead of selecting a vehicle by its number, maybe the person doesn't know the vehicle number. This does happen. So if they pick it by the description or the name, it makes their lives a little bit easier. So in order to get that two-way street to work, both have to be unique. Therefore, you need to have a unique name.
Another question, why won't a non-stock item deduct it from inventory after you have created and closed a work order?
Probably because you have a system setting that's turned on that says don't do that. So there's a setting here that says non-stock item quantity on hand always 0. So that if you turn that on, it's not going to deduct your non-stock items. It's not going to deduct the quantity. It's not going to deplete. That's the word I'm looking for. It's not going to deplete that inventory count, that inventory on hand quantity.
Okay, thank you. Next question, how do you set that to default to life to date status log and work order log? Sorry, let me read that again. How do you set that to default to life to date status log and work order log?
I don't, I think whoever asked the question, they're talking about they want this button here set to life to date.
Mary, can you clarify?
You would, what you would do is you'd have to artificially, here's why we don't do that. Because you could be pulling in so much data every time you bring in a screen that your system performance would just be terrible. But if you really want that, this is how you do it. You go to your custom date range filter and you put in that I want this to start on January 1st, 1977 and go to December 31st, 3035. And that effectively is life to date. None of us are going to live to see 3035, I don't think. And I'm not the only guy who was alive in 1977. But you have to fake the system out on that. That's the way you get that done. Okay.
I think that's all the questions so far. If you do have a question, just type it in the question box or feel free to raise your hand. Thanks.
All right,
thanks,
great. Good. No, the questions make for a better presentation. Although now I got to find out where I left off. But that's not so hard.
I think you were on barcode scanning inventory.
Oh yes, that's right, Ellen. Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, so for example, I've got a handy barcode and barcode scanner. These barcode scanners, let's see if I can turn my webcam on and show it to you. Is that it? Can you? I don't know if you can see me.
Yep, we can see you.
Well, I don't know if you can see the barcode scanner. You see that?
Just hold it up a little higher. There you go.
All right. I don't know why I can't see myself. Not that I want to, but before I could. So I've got, here's my little cheat sheet of barcodes here. So I don't know if you saw that either, but pretend that barcode is on a parts box or something like that. And you wanna find that part in your inventory. So listen carefully, you'll hear the beep. And the barcode scanner, it's a cool little tool, but all it is just a keyboard extension, and it converts that barcode that everybody is well familiar with into the appropriate set of characters and just types them right into that search field. And whammo, it found that Rain-X weather beater wiper blade number 22. So, you know, the barcode scanner can be a great way of typing in part numbers without actually having to type them in. And it'll look up the part based on the barcode number, and it understands that those two values can be distinct and separate. So if you haven't gotten a barcode scanner, they're very handy. And this is the Motorola LS2208. I don't know if that's upside down or not. And it plugs right into your USB port on your computer. It doesn't require any software. It's completely plug and play. And they cost about $100 to $120. And I think if you've got an Amazon Prime account, you'll probably have one on your door by Friday morning. Okay. So with parts, there's not just the establishment and creation of the part record, there's a number of part inventory reports that perhaps we should take a look at. So a key element here is the inventory value listing. We created this report years and years ago for a customer here in Colorado. And just for the purposes of not having a ton of data, I'm going to look at wiper blades here. Well, part type, right? Wipers. I want wipers. Let's get that down there. Wiper blades. And the inventory value listing report will retroactively value your inventory to a date in the past, looking at, you know, what's been done with that particular item. So when you click the OK button, it's asking you for a date. So maybe I'll just say 12/1/17, and it'll give me a report of all my wiper blades, showing me what their value was on that day 5 or 6 days ago, January 1st. And I can get this thing out of the way. It's listing them by part number and giving you the description. It's also showing the minimum and reorder quantities, unit costs, but most importantly is the inventory value here out on the right-hand side, and then a total value summarized at the bottom of the screen, of the report screen. So that's something that I'm not sure everybody knows about.
Quick question pertaining to this. Why can't you put zero cost on the price on a part? We have warranty parts that we do not pay for.
Let's see if you can do that. You can. I mean, you can put in a zero price. I just did it. There might be a user setting that's preventing the entry of that. There could be a user setting that's preventing them from typing in directly into this field. You know, we don't necessarily want people to directly edit those fields, but that's something that can be turned on and off on a user-by-user basis.
Okay, new question. Emergency management.
Was that a fellow named Kevin? If he wants, just email me and we can get together and take a look at what you have and figure out why it's not working for you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Quick question here. Emergency management is beginning to require barcoded inventory numbers for vehicles and equipment. Is there an attribute field that can be assigned for this, like the FEMA rate?
Let's take a look. The answer is yes. So look at that pickup truck, or any vehicle for that matter. There's a barcode number.
Darren, does that answer your question? And he's responding with, wouldn't that be the vehicle manufacturer barcode for warranty work? Oh, wait, yes.
I didn't hear you, Ellen, I'm sorry.
Sorry. So his question in whole is, emergency management is beginning to require barcode inventory number for vehicles and equipment. Is there an attribute field that can be assigned for this, like the FEMA rate? And then he added, after you showed him, he said, wouldn't that be the vehicle manufacturer barcode for warranty?
Well, we don't put any restriction on what barcode you want to use. So the answer is it's up to you, I believe. I might not be fully understanding the question, but we're not placing any restriction there.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to understand the requirement better, but that could be a long and drawn out conversation. So again, if you're, you folks in the audience, you're welcome to email me with questions afterwards, and we can get into the weeds on some of those things.
Okay. And back to Kevin's question about the zero cost. When you're entering a new part, it will not allow a zero cost. We have to put 001.
Now that's a horse of a different color, so maybe that's an enhancement we need to take care of. All right, where were we here? So we looked at an inventory value listing report for parts. Another report we created for a customer in Florida, inventory not used. And I looked at this in preparation over the last couple of days. Thought it was a great addition to the program. Not sure if people make use of it, but you might have parts on your shelves that haven't been used. So I can run an inventory not used report, and it's going to want a date range. So I'll say, show me everything that hasn't been used this year. So 1/1/17 through T for today, and click OK. And it found 16 wiper blades that I haven't used this year. So this report will give you some very nice information about how perhaps to better manage your inventory. So it's just showing me wiper blades because I'm still filtering by wiper blades. So there's also a whole set of transaction reports here. So you could look at maybe for the year 2017, a transaction log detail report. Maybe you want to group that by vendor and click the OK button, and we'll see that from Brian Rock. We bought some stuff, and it's going page by page. Here's some items we bought from Napa. We bought some stuff that wasn't assigned to a vendor, and so on and so forth. So the best way to learn how to use reports is to just experiment with them and play with them. And if it's not making perfect sense, get a hold of the help desk and they'll walk you through it. Another report is the reorder report, material parts reorder report, and I'll group that by vendor. Again, I will type in WB for wiper blade to sort of limit how much data we see. And this is going to show me vendor by vendor which wiper blades I need to reorder. And there's a flag mechanism over here on the left with that asterisk. Let me just blow that up a little bit. That shows you these stars here, and that is an indicator that the inventory quantity is below minimum. So these items are all due for reorder. And it's nicely grouped by vendor so that you can place your orders hopefully in a organized and well-structured manner. Right? All right, so that's parts. There's a lot, there's a lot here. So there's a lot of subtleties. I'm trying to point out some of the newer stuff and some of those subtleties that perhaps don't get used all that often. So we've looked at the equipment, number one. We've looked at parts, number two. But these items, there's no magic involved. Parts don't get on vehicles on their own. We need mechanics, which we've got employees for that. And then we also have contractors and vendors for that as well. So let's just look at some of the features here quickly to see how this dovetails with some of the fleet functionality. So we've got employee name, and then we've got their rate, their cost rates, which are important for job costing. And part of fleet maintenance, a big part of fleet maintenance, of course, is job costing. What are the labor costs with respect to performing these fleet maintenance jobs? So that information is here, this data is here. But another value that will make your life hopefully a little easier is this simple checkbox for mechanic. And we didn't spell it fully out because it just didn't look good. So by turning that checkbox on, your fleet work orders will be limited so that only the mechanics will be selectable for work on a fleet work order. So, we just did a big installation down in Alabama, and there's 300 employees, and there's perhaps a dozen fleet mechanics. And when they're doing fleet work orders, they don't want to have to rummage through 300 fellas and gals to find Charlie Brown who actually did the work. So by turning this filter checkbox on, it allows that fleet work order to limit very greatly what you see, reducing clutter and making the selection easier, and therefore making it less error prone. So this is a way to establish a set of mechanics that perform work on your vehicles. Now, in PubWorks Fleet, it's not just internal, inside mechanics that turn the wrenches. You can have outside contractors and vendors do that work as well. So let me just find the one I've got teed up here, Boyer Ford. So it's a dealer, and that dealer is what we call a service provider. So if they provide service, there's two check boxes here. Really struggling with the pen here. There's two check boxes here that are important. Service provider and product vendor. So a product vendor is somebody who sells you parts, like Napa, like AutoZone. These product vendors, they never really touch your vehicle. They're just delivering, filters and belts and other items to your shop as you need them. But the service provider might be actually performing work. So you'll bring the vehicle back to the vendor, or this specialist might come into your shop and actually do work on premise. So, and because they're checkboxes, as you can see, both can be turned on. So Boyer Ford, in this case, we can buy parts from Boyer Ford, and Boyer Ford can also do work for us. So by virtue of the fact that Boyer Ford is a service provider, they will be eligible for a fleet work order, to be a mechanic, so to speak, on a fleet work order. So I hope that's pretty clear. Pretty simple stuff. Both of these screens have a fleet work order log there and here at the top. And if we were to look at that log, this shows us all the fleet work orders that Boyer Ford has taken care of for us. In this case, I'm looking at life to date. If we look at that employee, Mike Hardy, he's not a mechanic, so he hasn't done any fleet work for us, hence there's no star on his fleet work order log tab. If I go to my friend Ned Arcata, good old Ned has lots and lots of fleet work orders that he's been involved in. So I guess not that many, just 17. So that's how that works. One last thing when we're talking about contractors and vendors, and it has to do with when we're searching through our, if you will, inventory of them or a list of them. You might be looking for a certain vendor that performs a certain work, a certain service, or provides a certain product. So those you can make notes down here at the bottom, either in contractor notes or in the products offered fields, that allow you to find, for example, in preparation, I figure, well, let's find somebody who does auto glass. So I got a broken windshield. I need to find a vendor who's going to either provide that product or that service to replace that broken windshield. So I'll click the locate button and I'll just type in the word glass. And it found it in three cases actually, in Foster Auto Glass here in the middle, and then New Jersey Supply, and then Krug Products. All these people do glass, but you might say, well, it's New Jersey Supply or Foster Auto Glass. We want to pick one of those two. Another example might be perhaps, let's say, bodywork. So I'll do a locate and type in BODY, and we can see that those values have been found here in the notes. see that Craig's Welding and Boyer Ford both do good body work, and but AOX Welding, they do poor body work. So you can use those notes to find vendors either for work or for not to do work for you. So I don't know if a lot of folks know about that, but I try to highlight that when I do trainings to let people know that that capability is there. Okay.
Pete, do you have a couple minutes for questions?
Let's go. Let them rip.
Great. How do you add a mechanic and a service provider to one work order?
Well, let's jump ahead a little bit. Fleet work orders. Add new. So when we create a fleet work order, we need to pick a unit 1114, or I can pick it by name. So if I know the name of that vehicle, you know, for that question we got before about the unique name, I know it's, yes, the GMC 500, great. I don't know what unit number is, but the software sure does. It knows it's 1338. This is where that pick by name or pick by unit number can be handy. You know, and I will admit that most fleet maintenance shops, they're all about unit numbers. I mean, you could wake a guy up in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he'll say, oh yeah, it's unit 1014, that Ford F-250, you know? So they know this is part of their culture. It's really well ingrained. But either way, you'll pick a unit number either by code or by name, by unit number or by description. And then I've got this teed up in the PowerPoint. You know, our fleet work order is structured in 3 big pieces. There's a header piece where you specify the unit you're working on, dates, odometer reading, the reason you're working on maybe a project, which is a new feature. And then to that, you're going to join or specify who did the work, the labor, the employee or the outside contractor vendor. And then if that laborer consumed any parts, that will also be part of the fleet work order. So let's go back to fleet work orders. I don't know if that made any sense, but I've been working with this for a long time, so I'm not sure I'm explaining things as well as they might be. So anyway, the fleet work order itself, it's a work order for a single vehicle. And that's what this top section is specifying. But this bottom section where we have employee/contractor details and parts used, this can be what we call one-to-many. You can have many, many items in here. So let me just do it. I'm going to add a new detail record. And I've got Net Arcata for 1 hour. And then I'm going to add another new detail record. Instead of picking Net Arcata, it's just being automatically picked. Here's my buddies at AOX Welding. They charge us $99. So there's an example of a fleet work order with an internal employee and an external service provider. And I'm not sure if I answered the question, but that's the way I interpreted it. So.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So James, I can open up James's mic and he can ask you a question
directly from the source. That'd be great.
James, you're live.
Yes. It was Pete, right?
Yeah. Hi. Right. Yeah. I feel like we're doing a radio show here. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah. It's like in the previous ones, they use the dashboard to graph things, like in pies and things like that.
Okay.
Can you do that with our inventory, our parts that we use and stuff?
Oh, I think I understand now. That yeah. So here's our fleet dashboard. You know, we don't have a place on here yet for parts consumed, but
like fuel, I see fuel usage. That's good.
Yeah, there's fuel usage. Yeah, I'm going a little faster. So, you know, fuel usage by quarter might make it a little more. Looks like everybody took a giant vacation in the 3rd quarter of 2013. But, you know, that's fuel usage. You know, I can't remember what some of the thoughts were when we designed this dashboard a couple of years ago, or however long ago it was. You know, parts just might be too varied. They just probably were too varied to come up with a nice, clean solution. But you know, I would love to talk to you about what your ideas are on this, because it might be really something. It might be something that's rather easy to do, It might not. I can't know for certain until we really get into the details on it. But
Yeah.
it sounds like a terrific idea. And you know, frankly, if it wasn't for questions like this, you know, we wouldn't have a lot of the features we have. It's the fellows and gals like you who are, you know, putting these ideas in our head, and we're trying to implement them as best we can. So.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Thanks, James.
Yep.
Another question, how can I associate COM fleet repairs to a project and report cost?
Okay, I don't really, COM fleet repair, that's throwing me off a little bit, but I'm just going to genericize that and say that in my mind means just basic general fleet maintenance activities that are recorded in the fleet, what we call the fleet work order. So if we look at the fleet work order, there is a new box, a new drop-down list, new set of drop-down lists for project. I can't remember when we added this, but it allows you to say, okay, this fleet work order with its $1,055.64 worth of cost now belongs to, I don't know, pick a project, Farm Road 178, okay? So keep that in mind. I've just tied this fleet work order to a project. Now, excuse me, if I go to my reports and go to project cost reports, let me get rid of that circle. I'll move that to the right and say, give me a cost summary report for project FR 178. And see this checkbox there, include fleet work orders? Very important. So if I run that report and turn that checkbox on, that fleet work order will be pulled into the report. If I leave the checkbox off, that fleet work order will be ignored. And my project costs will be different. My project costs will be different as a result. There's another way to skin this cat. If we look at on the reports menu, we go to fleet reports, fleet maintenance reports. You can select a project here, so Farm Road 178. So I can get a report, or well, there's a whole boatload of reports, as you can see from these radio buttons. I can filter my fleet maintenance reports by that project. So it won't bring in the general costs from the project. It'll only bring in the fleet maintenance related costs that have been linked to that project. On the project cost report side, it'll bring everything in so long as you turn this checkbox on. So I hope I've answered the question satisfactorily.
Thank you. Next question. Can parts kits be made to work in daily activities outside of the fleet module?
Right now, no. Right now, the answer to that is no. It's a pretty good idea, though. Make sure that question's written down, Ellen.
Yep, they all are. We are interested in barcodes for most of our parts. Where can we get codes from?
Well, they would come on the part box itself. You know, or you can type them in. You can use, this is what you can do. So we go to parts. You know, this might be something, it's going to go to a part where I have no barcode on. You know, maybe, you know, you could type in a part number here. So, or you could type in your own barcode number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if I save that, I can run a report. There's a barcode listing. And I just want to isolate this report. I want to isolate this part, so I'm going to copy that part number right there. Let's see what happens here. So see that barcode? Can you see that? Let me make that a little bigger. So I typed it, I made up a barcode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I've printed that out. We have a report that prints these out. And you can, we can, I think this is set up so it prints on like an Avery label. It's been so long I can't remember the details, but we could certainly make it fit on an Avery label, and then you can use those labels to, well, to put wherever you want to put them. But what the other idea is that, you know, the barcode is right on the part box itself. The product will have a barcode on it. So you can make up the barcode. You can use an established barcode from the product itself. But the key thing is that you need to, number one, put that barcode here on this, in this field. And then when you're on a fleet work order, if you shoot the barcode for this, in this particular case, it'll, you know, you shoot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 from that barcode. PubWorks will translate that into the part number and insert it onto the fleet work order.
Thank you. Next question. While attempting to delete an employee time from a work order, I deleted the work order. Can I get that work order back?
Probably not, unless you've got a backup of your database from before that deletion occurred, and you'd have to hand key it in. I mean, we could write a script to do it, but it would probably be faster to hand key it. But when you're on a fleet work order and you click delete, it says, "Are you sure?" and there's no undelete. I guess maybe that's a little harsh, but there's also user powers that, and I was going to show this earlier. If we look at user powers on the fleet settings component or tab, this is important. We separate that delete function from add modify. We talked about this yesterday on service requests or activity records. We made the same separation finally, but that separation of user powers could potentially prevent that problem. So I'm sorry I don't have I know I didn't answer your question the way you wanted it, but because you wanted me to say, oh yeah, you just do this and that work order will be restored. No, I'm sorry, it won't.
Okay.
It's probably a hand operation.
So the hand,
how do you help you do it? We could certainly help you do it, but there's not an automatic way to do it. I'm sorry.
Next question. Downtime on the fleet work order will only add up to 8 hours, not by 24-hour. If we have a vehicle out for 2 days, that should show out for 48 hours, but it only shows out for 16.
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, we kind of assume it's an 8 hour day. So I think we could probably look at that and make some adjustments to that in the software. So Ellen, let's find out who that question's coming from, and I'll talk it out with this person.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've talked about some essential building blocks, equipment, parts. We've talked about mechanics, both in the forms of internal employees, external service providers, contractors, vendors, some other pretty important items, PM items, okay? You know, a big part of fleet maintenance is knowing that you're keeping up on your, what I've learned are called services, but you want to make certain that maintenance items are done in a timely manner to keep warranties satisfied, and that's just a best management practice. So there's the concept of a PM item, and let me just go to the PowerPoint because there's a little graphic here that helps with this. It's a pretty simple process of creating a PM item. Darn it. Creating a PM item and then associating that PM item to a set of vehicles and equipment. And then once that association's been made, you can use the PM item in your fleet work orders. And it'll cycle through your PM schedule by looking at the fuel and odometer log, and it'll also look at dates and odometer readings that have been recorded on fleet work orders. So it's a virtuous cycle, if you will, with regard to PM items. So PM items are rather a simple concept, very well understood and known concept. Like everything else in PubWorks, there's a code, an abbreviation that identifies an item, but also a descriptive name that equally identifies it or alternatively identifies it. There's an interval with which that PM item should be serviced. And if you were to create a new one, it's a simple add new here, lower left-hand corner. You put in a code and name, so use C for user conference demo, and I'm going to do this once every year. And I click save, and that item is in there. So perhaps I went a little bit fast, but just put in the code and name, yellow field's mandatory, put in your frequency or your interval if you wish, and click the save button, and that item is stored. Now, it's completely useless until you associate vehicles to the PM item. Now, if you misspelled it, you can double click that row and change the spelling. PM item, I want to make it a little more clear. You can delete that item so long as it's not linked to anything else. But the association button here in the center is very, very important. And if you click that associate button, you get this screen by which you can tie that PM item to any number of vehicles. And here's where that categorization power comes into play. The assumption is, or the default is that you might want to, oh, I clicked on the wrong item. Oh, there it is. You might want to associate this new PM item, the user conference demo PM item, based on equipment type. But you can manipulate that. You can say, well, I want to do it by department. Now it's showing you a list of all your departments that own vehicles, or maybe by vehicle class, or maybe just by the vehicle unit number. So you can make, or the vehicle description. So you can make use of any one of these, what's the word, filters perhaps, or views of your equipment and vehicle data to make the association of the PM item to them faster and easier. So it might be rather tedious to say, well, I want to use this motor grader and I want to use that motor grader for this PM item, et cetera, and so on. That might be quite a few mouse clicks. So instead, maybe I say, well, I just want this PM item to be on my my graders. So I make that single selection, click the Add Association button, lower left-hand corner, and the software is going to say, hey, I found 13 graders to associate, and that's been done. So PM item added to 13 pieces of equipment. And finished. Click close, and that PM item now, that user conference demo PM item, has been tied to, see that tab over here on the right has a 13 in it, lucky 13. And there are the 13 motor graders that we've tied that PM item to. So I hope that's pretty clear. Again, help desk can walk you through this. It's a pretty straightforward process. The essential steps are, as you create the PM item with its appropriate interval, you associate that PM item to the appropriate set of vehicles and equipment. That association mechanism gives you what I think is some great flexibility on finding the vehicles to which you need to make the association. And then you just click these buttons, simply moving stuff from left to right and clicking add. You can also remove it. If you've made a mistake, you can use the remove association button to undo that mistake, start over, and get it right. When looking at this screen here, there's some additional functionality that I'm not so certain is well known. The history button, well, it says I have no PM items associated with user conference demo, which is right because we just created it. So that's a good thing. So let me click on one that I know has some values, lube, oil, and filter. And if I click on that button, the history button now, it's giving me quite a bit of data showing me through my custom date range. Remember, I set my custom date range to be some very, very wide time frames. So let me just make that back to the last 365 days. And in the last 365 days, the lube, oil, and filter has been performed 19 times on various vehicles. So in various work orders. So there's the vehicle unit number there in the middle, the work order number over here on the left. This screen also has some not only sizing capabilities, but also filtering capabilities. So maybe you want to see if that's been done to a particular unit, unit 1014, make that selection. You can see that for unit 1014, that Chevy 2500, and the PM item lube oil and filter. It's been done twice in our custom date range. And if I want, another thing in PubWorks, perhaps not well known, is when you've got a drop-down list that's filled in like these two are, you can double-click to clear them, and that data should reshape itself. But it's, so once I clear those items out, the data in the grid has been refreshed, no longer taking advantage or using those filters. So if we use that filter again for unit 1014, we can demonstrate another feature of PubWorks. And let me just do a little resizing here. So this history screen is meant to show you where and when those PM items have been serviced, either on a PM item basis or on an individual vehicle basis. And from this PM item screen, you've got some options. You can display the work order. So you click on a row and then click the display selected work order button, or you can double click on the row. It does the exact same thing, takes you right to that fleet work order. And you can see, perhaps it's a little subtle. Well, it is a little subtle. We don't have a lot of room to display it, but there's that PM item A right there. So software's not lying. That's a good thing. Another feature perhaps is to print the listing of those items just by clicking that print listing button. You need to hand that off to your boss or to the owner of the vehicle to show them when that item was serviced historically. Another feature here is the export to CSV, and we looked at that, or we described some of that yesterday in the first session. So the other thing I wanted to demonstrate is this hyperlink for equipment code and name. Again, it's meant to mimic what you see in an internet browser. You'll see a blue underscored hyperlink. That used to be the standard. The standard has been loosened enormously, and hyperlinks take on all sorts of forms these days. But the blue underscoring is still very well recognized. And we're trying to leverage that because we're assuming many people have seen that and they'll know what to do with that. So just by clicking on that hyperlink, it takes us right to that vehicle record. And this is another nice thing about a multi-windowed screen. You can look at a lot of different things at the same time. Gives you a really terrific perspective on your data. A lot of software products. We use one for our internal use. It's one screen at a time, and it can get a little frustrating. So multi-screen is a good thing.
Pete, I've got one quick question.
Great.
How do you use service groups?
Service groups are, I'm very interested to hear that there's a question about this. It's like a super kit. And I don't know in 20 years if anyone's ever used this feature, except for me, in demonstrations and such. It's sort of a super kit. So it combines with individual tasks that can be performed in the course of vehicle maintenance with a set of parts. So in this case, for body work, we use a particular part, and for replacement, we're using 4 individual parts. The service group in totality is using 5 parts, and you can select this or key it in using the service group code or name on the fleet work order, and it will expand this stuff right out to the fleet work order. So it's a very powerful tool. I'm just afraid that nobody really uses it. But I wasn't really prepared to demonstrate that today because, as I mentioned, I'm really not certain it gets a lot of use. I'm just sort of thinking it's kind of a redheaded stepchild of the software. But whoever asked that question, I'd be happy to sort of in a different session go through what service groups are about. So Ellen,
Okay, thank you.
You know who that is, and I can reach out.
I know who it is. Thanks.
Good. Just going back to the PM items, another feature here is the reports button. So it's a way for you to get some simple listings of your PM items with their intervals. For example, here it is. Or another example is to show your PM items based on equipment. Let me see what we get for that. So let me just go with lube, oil, and filter. So we limit that. So lube, oil, and filter is tied to a large number of equipment items. Let me get rid of that and do that again. And I'm going to page through to that user conference demo item we set up. And you can see there's the 13 motor graders we tied to that particular PM item. So, it's just a way of slicing and dicing your data. Another way to look at it is maybe you want to reverse that, turn it on its head, and for individual vehicles, see what PM items are associated to them. So, here's an example of this Caterpillar dozer. It's got 4 PM items associated to it. Another question might be, what equipment show me a list of equipment with no PM items. So there's 16 vehicles in our system that have no linkage to any PM items. So there's a number of tools here that you can use to make sure your data is set up properly and organized well and the way you want it. We've got 2 more things to cover, and one is what we call shop tasks. Shop tasks are designed to represent things that are done almost exclusively in the fleet maintenance area. And it's a very simple setting that you need to render to get shop tasks to show up for you. Just turn that checkbox on in the lower left-hand corner. So create a task with its code and name, perhaps categorize it so that it falls into a meaningful group, and make sure you turn that checkbox on at the bottom. Because now PubWorks will filter that subset of tasks into fleet work orders and make them available for you. So you're not looking through hundreds of, we've got some customers that have a lot of tasks. And by segregating them into this group, it would make fleet maintenance folks' lives a little easier. So turn that checkbox on and you'll have that very tidy subset of tasks at your fingertips. When you're looking at these tasks, most of our other fleet functions, let me just get one that's got some stuff on it, like this particular replacement task. It's got a fleet work order log, and in my demo database, I haven't really made use of tasks all that extensively, but it's going to show you a list of the history of that task and where it's been, on which work orders it's been performed and which unit number it's been worked on. So you've got that. Let's just take a look at part kits, because that's another very nice item that we call a data entry expediter or data entry accelerator. It's a way for you to get both speed and accuracy. So you can set up a part kit. I think I already set one up here for the user conference. No, I didn't. So I'm going to set one up here. I just come to this screen, click the add new button. This is my user conference kit. Give it a code, user conference demo kit, and it can have a default task, but this is where my shop tasks will come into play. So I'll leave that as a replacement for replacing those parts, and I'll save that header section. So now I can start making part choices, and I've got a grid here. It's initially empty, and I can start typing into that grid or making selections from the drop-down list, and it's going to be looking through my parts inventory. I can make a selection there, and so that's one way to do it. I can type in the number, and it knows that that's a brake disc, and I'm going to say I'm going to use 2 of those. And I might want to locate a part, look up a part. There's a very handy button down here on the lower left called Locate a Part. And if I click on that as a demonstration, it brings up a search screen. And maybe I'll type in something like spring. And it found a number of items here. So I'll make a selection. Do you want to insert this part on my kit? Yeah, put that on there. And I'm going to change the quantity from 1 to 8. And you can do this until the cows come home. There's no limit to the number of parts you can put onto a kit. And once I've got that saved, that's all well and good. It's sort of like my ace in the hole. And we'll see how we're going to make use of that later. We've got a number of other kits that show up in this list view. All of them are rather slim, but they can all be used in a fleet work order. All right, so part kits, we'll see how they're used, and I think the lesson will, well, maybe I'll just jump right to that. If I go to a fleet work order and let's just find one that doesn't have anything, I'll just create a new one, and I'm going to say I'm going to work on unit 1014, which is my Chevy pickup, and I'm going to add some detail here, and it's going to be Ned Arcata, 1 hour, and he used user conference kit. Type in that kit name, uppercase, lowercase, and it's immediately, as soon as I tab off of that cell, that part kit is expanded onto the fleet work order detail. Now, once it's there, I can change the default quantities if I wish. Okay, or I can remove an item if I want to. So I clicked on the row for the item I want to remove. I click the delete line item button at the bottom and say, yes, I'm sure I want to remove this part from the work order. Thank you very much. And it's removed. Now, the kit has not been changed, just its use at this time. Its use at this time is only specifying these two items with slightly different quantities. So when you use the kit, you can do whatever you want with it. You've got all degrees of freedom to manipulate its use, but it doesn't affect, sort of in arrears, the part kit that you established at the beginning. So I'm going to cancel this. Okay, so I want to get into the day-to-day stuff. And I'm not sure where I am with my schedule, but I'm sure I'm way long. But let's just muscle through it and see what kind of questions come up. I've kind of constructed a workflow. So we showed some of this yesterday where you might have a fleet service request that comes in where someone documents that somebody wants something done to their vehicle. So I click on the fleet menu, go to fleet service request, the very first item. I'll do an add new, and yellow mandatory, white optional. A request number isn't yet assigned, so that's why the word new is there. I'll type in my vehicle number, unit 1014, or I could have selected it from the list in unit number order, or I could have selected it based on its name or description. Or, you know, this is another feature that I don't know if people are well aware of. There's a little E button here with a tooltip that says click to look up / find equipment. So if I didn't know the unit number, or I wasn't certain, maybe I type in 36, 363. Oh yeah, it's that whatever it is, So you can use that to find one of your items, and then once you found it, it'll insert that for you. So let's go back to, I'm kind of prepped for unit 1014. And when I make that selection, some items are automatically filled in. But we've got a default setting for the repair reason, but you can make whatever selection you wish. You can assign this to a mechanic if you want. Maybe I'll assign that to Ned Arcata. It so happens that I'm logged in and I'm pretending to be Ned, so that's why the taken by field was automatically filled in. The software knows that this unit 1014 belongs to the Road and Bridge Department. It also knows that John Garfield is the operator. His phone number is 270-1458, and his email address is this email address. But maybe I need to call up John or email him and say, hey, what's the odometer reading on that? You didn't let us know. So I got his phone number right there, but I also have his email address. Maybe I click that email hyperlink and Microsoft Outlook comes alive, and I can email this service request directly to John. And here I can say, hey, what's the odometer? I'm not going to type in it. Hey, what's the odometer reading, John? You forgot to let us know. And then he'll email you back with the number, and you'll type it in 125699, and the description is that my tail light's out. Need tires rotated too. And I'll save that. So now I've got a service request record out there. Where does it go? Where does it go? So let's look at a couple of places it goes. One is right on the vehicle, right to the vehicle. And I can use my hyperlink here to immediately go to that vehicle. I mean, I could go to Fleet and go to the equipment screen and search for it and find it, but if I just click that hyperlink, bang, that vehicle record comes up instantly. And if I look at its fleet work order, fleet service request log tab, you know, there it is. There it is, service request number 14 was created on December 6th, 2017. And here's all the data on it. And conversely, if this service request screen in the background were closed and I was just simply on this equipment screen, I could double click on that row and it would launch the service request screen for me and display it for that item that I clicked on. So that's one place it goes. The other place it goes is, I'm going to close that equipment screen. I'll just move this back upper left. There's a screen we call the service request status screen. And so here are all the service requests I have on file. Very similar to many of the other status type screens in the system. Lots of filtering at the bottom with drop-down lists of various types. I know Bill Jackson showed off the M multiple choice buttons here that accompany these drop-down lists. So there's a lot of ways to look at the data that you want to look at. The status value here by default is set to open. The assumption is that when you bring the service request status screen into view, you only really want to see the open items. But you could double click that and see all the items. Some are pending, some are closed, et cetera, and so on. And then this screen gives you the ability to navigate by double clicking directly back to the service request. And let's go to a closed one, because this closed one has in it, the bottom is a grid. In this case, it's just a one line item grid of a fleet work order that's been created from that service request. So let's see how that works. So if I go back to my service request number 14, let me put that up here. So you've got this problem you're looking at, and you're like, okay, great, well, I think we can work on this today. Maybe you'll call John Garfield and say, hey, bring it in tomorrow morning or bring it in this afternoon. And once it's been brought to the shop, perhaps you use this button over here called Create Work Order. And what this does for you is it create work order button, it has spawned, it's created a fleet work order, and it's copied all the stuff from the fleet work order, from the fleet service request to the fleet work order. It's copied the vehicle information. It knows it's a road and bridge vehicle. It knows it was a driver's report. It's coming from service request 14. The odometer reading's been copied over, as has this note. So there's no duplication of effort. If you've typed those things into your fleet service request, they're nicely copied over to the fleet work order. So now that I've got a fleet work order, I can actually get to work here and document the repair that we did or the maintenance we've done on the vehicle. So,
Pete, I've got a quick question here.
Sure.
Will there be vehicle or equipment hour field on the fleet work order? There's only mileage right now. We go off of hours on a lot of vehicles for PM services.
That's a function of how you have your odometer set up in the vehicle record. So if you look at a vehicle record, you know, there's over here, there's a odometer setting. So you should look at this section of your vehicle and equipment screen and make sure that this is set up in a way that's appropriate. You know, a lot of times what happens is we get a new customer, we perform a data conversion for them, and the data that we get, this kind of information may not be available. So we default everything to miles, and we go through it in the training that, you know, you have to look at these vehicles and make sure you set them up appropriately, make that radio button choice appropriately here. And sometimes that gets done for some of the vehicles, maybe not all of them, but that's something that as a user you need to be aware of. So take a look at that and you know, let us know if that's still a problem. We can perhaps help you with that. But an enhancement we're going to make is soon. We've got a secondary odometer setting here, but to make that available on the fleet work order too, so that you can enter meter readings for both miles and hours. So
Is there a way to do both?
there will be in the future, but not now.
Thank you. Next question. Does completing the fleet work order close the fleet service request, or do they both need to be closed manually?
It completes it, yes. It doesn't need to be done manually.
Okay, thank you. And then another question about fuel system importing. I have Phoenix. Every Monday morning I have to export, then import. Is there a way that it will auto import?
Well, potentially. We talked about this yesterday in the What's New section, where we are now, for a customer of ours who uses this system called Ward, they're all very similar, but Ward is, their data is in a SQL Server database, so we were able to easily reach into it and pull the transactions semi-automatically. When I say semi-automatically, what I mean is our customer in Alabama no longer has to do an export and then an import. They still have to go to the fuel and odometer screen and say, bring in the transactions. So there's like no magic in the background that's, saying, oh, at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, do this. We haven't built it as a service that runs automatically. So a human being would need to initiate it at this point. But at the it's a great time saver, because you don't have to do the export and then the import. You just say, do the import, and voila, it reaches out there and grabs the data. Now, that doesn't do you any good because you have Phoenix Petrovent. So we'd like to, because somebody asked this question on Tuesday about the same kind of functionality for Fuel Master. And if we can do it for Ward, I'm sure we can do it for Fuel Master. And if we can do it for Ward and Fuel Master, I'm sure we can do it for Petrovent. We're just at the beginning stages of this, but make sure Ellen knows who you are, and let's see what we can do about that.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions as of right now.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we had a fleet service request. We converted it into a fleet work order. Let's just talk about how the fleet work order is structured briefly. There's a header section at the top where you make your vehicle selection. There's a hyperlink above that where you can navigate directly to the vehicle to look up additional information about it, look at its history, look at some other items that might be pertinent. In blue here in the center, we're telling you it's a road and bridge vehicle. It's a 2006 Chevy 2500. On the right-hand side, you can key in the meter reading. In this case, it's miles, because this vehicle is set up with a primary odometer based on miles. It's looking up the last time it was worked on, and we must have another fleet work order in the system here that we should get rid of. Just delete this. So if I can do it right from here. It's looking up the prior miles and the prior date on which this vehicle was serviced. There's a priority drop-down list. Again, this is category data you can set up. We can help show you where to do it, but these are customer-defined, user-defined values. There's a reason, repair reason. Again, customer-defined, user-defined values that an administrative user on your side would establish and you'd make use of. These are very useful for reporting power. So category data, like we mentioned a little bit earlier today. On the left-hand side, the date and the time in that vehicle came in. The PubWorks software will automatically insert these based on your settings. You can manipulate them if you wish. When a work order is completed, the date out and timeout will be plugged in. As was pointed out, we're working on an 8-hour day. That tooltip tells you that right there. Downtime in hours, generally based on a Monday through Friday week. 8 hours, 8 a.m. to 5, so with 1 hour for lunch. So that's something I think whoever that person asked the question, I want to make sure I can talk to him and figure out going forward a better way to do that. There's also, we built for a customer in Florida, the ability to use these fleet work orders as invoices. That customer in Florida takes care of the fire apparatus for this neighboring cities. They're in Western Florida. So they want to make certain they bill them for that work. They want to make sure they can track whether or not that item was paid for. So we've got that capability. And when was it paid for? So then, of course, we've talked about the project linkage. So at the very least, you create a fleet work order, you tie it to a vehicle, and put in some notes. There's no limit to the number of notes and the length of the notes. You can, it's literally unlimited. I guess it's limited by your disk space, but that's really inconsequential. And then you can add detail. Now, the idea was that a fleet work order can have multiple people working on it all at the same day or on different days, different times, what have you. So we've got the ability to add detail records either for in-house mechanics. So I'm logged in as NetArcada. So the software is filling me in as the default mechanic because that's the way I've got it configured. And I'll say, well, I did some work here. I spent 2 hours. Maybe I performed a task on it, replacement of parts, and I can look for that Bosch wiper blade, the icon blade. So I click that locate button at the bottom left. It found that item and it's asking me if I want to plug that in. And why does it take 2 hours to put a wiper blade on? Well, you don't, if you knew my mechanical skill set, it would make quite a bit of sense. So I can say I've got a mechanic here. He worked on a specific day, December 6th, labor type, all this business that you've seen before, perhaps in other parts of the system. Click save, and that detail item is there. I can add another detail item here. And I'll pick instead, you know, I don't know, Boyer Ford. And they spent an hour, you know, doing work for us. And we are not going to specify any parts. They just did some labor for us. Maybe they did some, I don't know, hydraulic work on the vehicle. So click save on that. And I've got a mix of in-house and outside people doing work for us. So, you know, in the interest of time here, it's almost 2 o'clock. I mean, we've been going here for 2 solid hours. I'm going to sort of abbreviate some of this stuff. But let me add another record here where it'll be net again, and maybe I'll pick one of those parts. So the or the kit. Remember, I created the user conference kit, and that expands, and I'll save that. And whoops, I need to put some hours in there. So an hour. And all those parts are now on my fleet work order, but it's very well understood by the software who has used which parts on which days. It's kept very much in order. And only until you save the work order, by clicking the save button at the very top, will your inventory be depleted. Now, another feature is adding parts on the fly. So if I come to one of my details, and this is where parts are added, I've got access to my full parts inventory, but I might want to put a part in there that's not in our inventory. So I'm going to call this the user conference part, and I used one of those, and they're $22.22. And the software has detected the fact that this part has never been seen before, at which point I can affirm that I want to add it as a non-stock item, or I could say, well, you know, this is something we're going to stock, so add it as a stock item, and make sure we buy it from AutoZone, and make sure that it's coming from the Fleet Maintenance Parts Fund, and I could put a PO on there and an invoice and a comment if I want. All this stuff will be, once I click the yes button, will be pushed into the PubWorks database, and you'll have a new parts record. And if I click save here, and then save at the very top, this fleet work order has been costed out. All these parts have been linked to it and have been consumed from our inventory. And the various fleet work order logs that we saw on the equipment screen, the parts screen, the mechanic screen, they've all been updated behind the scenes. And when you go to those screens, you'll see that data as you've entered it. So
I've got a question.
yeah.
How do you assign a work order to a mechanic?
Well, you really don't. You can create, if you were to create a new work order by clicking Add New, and you pick a vehicle. So again, I'll pick unit 1014. I can add a detail record and pick Net Arcata, and that effectively, there's a setting where you can allow the software to not require hours, but it's requiring hours. This has effectively been assigned to him, but the work order itself, the assignment to an individual isn't part of our system, because we can have multiple people working on it at any given time. But by virtue of the fact that Net has been put on the work order, it's sort of interpreted as an assignment. So as an example, if I save that and look at my fleet work order status screen, you can see that I bring up fleet work order status. And because of a configuration setting, it's automatically filtering by employee. And that NED has been tied to this particular work order, number 12,910, which is this work order we just created, 35 seconds ago. But that's as close as we come to assigning it. If you can do that, I mean, it's a quasi assignment, but it's not a real, it's kind of a dotted line assignment. It's not like the solid line assignment we see in service requests. All right, so moving along here, in the interest of time, I want to cover some of the high points here. So when we're looking at fleet work orders, there's a number of things we can do with the work order. For example, there's the reports button. So a couple of reports that we've added, one of we added recently was a, we've always had the concept of what we call the preliminary worksheet. And that's a way, we got this idea from a customer in Ohio where she wanted to tee up the work order and then hand off some paperwork to the mechanic, and he could fill in the blanks. Then the mechanic, with the blanks filled in, would return that paperwork to the clerical staff, and they would key in what he filled in on the paperwork. And it was a nice workflow for them. So the preliminary worksheet in the header section is showing you the work order number, the date, the unit, and some other information about it. But there's a big worksheet here so that the mechanic can write the parts that they used, a section for comments, some sign-off information or fields here if you wish, and then a listing of the PM items that mechanic might check or execute, if you will, or service for this particular unit. So that's the concept there. Sort of related to that or similar to that is the idea of a blank worksheet, completely blank. We added this for some customer in the Northeast. I can't remember who, but it's just a simple blank worksheet. They could print this out and make photocopies of it and hand it out to the mechanic staff, and they can use this as their paperwork, and this can be customized to look however a customer might want it. So let me find a work order here that's got some stuff on it, make it a little more interesting. So here's a work order, and maybe the owner of this vehicle wants a printout of that parts and labor detail. And this is a listing of all the parts and the labor that went into this particular fleet work order. So right from the work order screen itself. Another way, maybe instead of sending that through the sneaker net, you can email that to the owner of the vehicle. There's my Outlook. So remember that unit 10,014 was, the operator was John Garfield. So we found his email address, plugged it in, and here's all the nitty gritty. And we can send that to him in email form instead of a printed form. But again, those printed forms can always be PDF'd, and you can always email those. So when you're looking at a fleet work order, you can tie, using the More button, you can tie documents to it. And I've somehow messed that up in my system where I can't do it for some reason. I have to figure that out. It's an INI setting that I bollocksed in preparation. So, but you could, you've got a fender bender you're repairing, you take a picture of the fronted door panel, stick that on there, maybe the invoice from Boyer Ford that they sent you for that body work they did or whatever work they did. You can attach that to the fleet work order record or the vehicle record for that matter. You know, fleet work orders, they when they appear, they come in a lockdown mode. We covered this. It's similar to activity records and now service requests. So if you want to make a change to the record itself, you'd have to click the edit button. And then at that point, you've got all degrees of freedom to make additions or modifications as you need to. You know, here you can see that I've got, maybe you can't see, maybe you're not aware of this, but let me point it out. You know, I've got 4,973 fleet work orders in my system, which is a pretty good amount. But I know for some of our customers, they've got lots, thousands and thousands of them. So the sort order that they select through the sort button might be important. And my recommendation is to look at things in reverse chronological order. So I've got my date in and descending, and then from there I go work order descending as well. So you've got some selections available here off that sort button. And once you make that sort selection, the software will remember that for you. And your sort selections will be different than perhaps your neighbor's sort selection, and the software keeps those separate and lets you operate with whatever sort selections you want. Another thing we've got here off the button bar is if you've got an open fleet work order, you can quickly check what PM items are due for service for that vehicle with a button click. And you might look at this and say, oh gosh, let's take care of that lube, oil, and filter. You know, while we've got the patient on the table, let's take care of these PM items and get those knocked out. It would be sort of a shame for that vehicle to come in for the tire rotation or the tail light fix, and then it goes out, and then we discover tomorrow morning that we need to perform a service on it. So we have the patient on the table. Let's do as much as we can for that patient while we've got them there. Okay, moving right along, unless there's questions. I'm just going to wear everybody out. It goes so long that they'll have no more questions. Let me just cancel that. I don't know how am I going to get that done there. I got this problem here. Move it away. That's it. So a very important screen, I think, is the fleet work order status screen. And it gives you an ability to not only keep tabs on what you've got cooking in terms of fleet work orders, and I'm going to clear net out of there, but it shows you all your open fleet work orders. You can look at completed, incomplete, all. It's not just a status screen, but it's a very handy reporting screen with lots and lots of filtering. Our customer in Florida is using this to look at who's paid them, who hasn't paid them, things of that nature. If it's got PM items on it, if it doesn't have PM items on it. So there's a lot of, and again, in the interest of time, I don't want to wear you down. These radio buttons and check boxes here give you a great deal of flexibility to perform lookups and searches. The drop-down lists over here on the right, maybe I just want to see everything for road and bridge pickup trucks, taking advantage of that category data, and it's limiting my view based on those selections. You've got M buttons for multiple choice, so perhaps I want to look at pickup trucks and motor graders at the same time. I get a different view now. And the software is also not only displaying a different view of blue and white data in the grid, it's also summarizing that data, parts, labor, and total for you to get an idea of what this operation is costing you. So it's not only just that. I feel like the guy with the Ronco steamer, and it's not just that, or whatever he says on TV. You can print the listing of this information. You can export this to CSV. We briefly mentioned that yesterday. And you can navigate to either by double clicking in the blue and white grid itself or selecting a row by clicking on it and then click the display work order button, and voila, you're taken right there. Another thing we added, I think we added this sometime last year, instead of looking at just work orders, you can look at vehicles that are down. Well, I don't know why. So that's not, so for some reason I can't get that to work either. So moving right along. Fuel and odometer log. So, we've got a PM schedule. It needs to be fed with data, and half of the data we feed the PM schedule is coming from fleet work orders, the dates and odometer readings we record there. But the other half comes from the fuel and odometer log. And the fuel and odometer log does double duty. It's not only feeding our PM schedule, but it's also providing us a mechanism to analyze fuel consumption and manage the data that we're getting out of, maybe it's Ward, maybe it's Fuel Master, maybe it's Gas Boy, maybe it's Petroven, Phoenix Petroven. I use those names synonymously, but whatever fuel system you have, we haven't run into one we can't work with. So again, another screen with a blue and white grid with lots of filtering capabilities. I'm going to perform an abbreviated approach here. You can use the filters at the top to, for example, say again, I'll go my pickup trucks in the road and bridge department, change my time frame, clear that out so I can look at all 166 transactions that have been imported or placed in the system that meet this criteria. And then of these 166 rows here, it's 3,200 gallons at a cost of about $8,000. If I spot a problem in here, I can double click the row and make an edit directly to the imported data. I could have done the same thing by clicking on the row and clicking the modify button at the bottom. So there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. I can add a record manually by clicking the add new button at the bottom left. If I find a row that shouldn't be in there, I can click the delete button and either delete the selected row, delete all the rows, or delete a batch of transactions. So maybe I imported a batch for this week and I want to delete that. So those delete functions, we can get into some depth on those, but I think that we're not going to do those today because of time. A change we made for customers, they wanted to be able to, in bulk form, update all the prices on their fuel. So they would filter down the transactions to the subset of transaction they wanted to look at. They'd put in a new fuel cost and click the OK button, and that price per gallon would automatically be updated after this little affirmation screen. So I'm going to say yes, update all 166 transactions to $2.66 a gallon. And that's been updated there. So worry not, this is just demo data. It's meant to be manipulated like this. The import button, many of you are well aware of, and this is where you would browse around to a file of transactions. And this we had a question, how can I avoid doing this step? And we've circumvented this with Ward, and like I mentioned, we'd like to explore how to do the same with Fuel Master and Petroven. But for now, on those systems, you would create the export file and then navigate to it, browse to it, click the import button, and PubWorks will read all those transactions in for you. Now I have a new set of transactions in there for 2017. And again, I'm using some grouping here to limit my view. If I got rid of those, we'd see that we've got 1,900 transactions. The fuel and odometer log, again, it feeds the PM schedule. It's a way to get transactions imported. It's a way to analyze and slice and dice. You can also export these rows to CSV, but it's also a gateway by clicking that reports button at the bottom, the gateway to more formal reporting that is rather varied and quite flexible. So detailed listing, let me do a little bit of filtering here. Again, I like my pickup trucks and road and bridge. I know I have a lot of data for that. Maybe I just want to look at that for the year 2017. I get a detailed listing. It's showing me those transactions vehicle by vehicle. I'm just clicking the next button on my crystal navigator at the top, and it's taking me through each record. Maybe I want to do an intermediate summary, and that's going to, let me just do a little bit of different grouping here. Instead of grouping it by unit number, I'll group it by equipment type. And it's showing me all those vehicles within that group, one after the next, and the quantity of fuel and the number of transactions that have been imported there in the center. Another report might be do a summary listing, and you would group that maybe by, I'll get rid of some of these filters and get a different layout. So I could look at all my vehicles in 2017 and see what kind of fueling transactions have come in. And with some nice data visualization here at the bottom with the pie chart and the bar graph. So a good deal of variety here. One last report I'll show is this MPG report. See what we get for that. All right. Let me just limit that again to pickup trucks and road and bridge, because this way something will stand out that I want to point out. You can see that we've got a lot of vehicles with MPGs that are rather low. We've got one that's rather high, and I changed my thresholds for this Chevy 2500 so that this one wouldn't be flagged. But on that equipment spec screen we showed before, maybe it's a little foggy where that came from. Fleet equipment pickups. If I go to specs here, you know, we've got a range right there of MPG values, and I changed that to something really high. But let me make that something that's a little more reasonable, 20 miles to a gallon. And if I go back to that report, you know, right now that 252 miles per gallon, which is a whopper, it's being flagged as a little bit high. That's what that plus mark says. So, you know, it may be instrumental or wise to look into why our MPG for this vehicle is so high. Maybe those transactions were entered wrong, or some other culprit might be at work here to give us that outlier. So. All right, so moving right along here, fuel and odometer log feeds the PM schedule. What else feeds the PM schedule? Well, the work orders and the fact that we're logging dates and odometer readings, just like we are with the fuel and odometer log. So let's take a look at that PM schedule. It comes up blank unless you have a setting that tells it to run automatically. In the interest of making this easy to describe, I'm going to say, well, I'm just interested in road and bridge vehicles that need lube, that are pickup trucks through a time frame. I'm looking at this time frame group here, maybe the month of December 2017. So show me for road and bridge pickups what PM items that are overdue only based on work orders, the largest odometer readings and the largest odometer readings in the odometer log, or I could look at the latest ones, either one. You've got that choice. And click this generate list button, and it's showing me that I've got 43 items I need to service. So quite a bit here. Quite a bit that we've fallen behind on. And this sizable screen gives us a number of options to work with. The generate list button is what I use to create the list. The clear list button will just blank it right out, and I can make additional selections up here at the top and click generate list again, and I get the same information. So I can print this list in a number of different ways. I can export it to CSV, so I'll spare you that. I can email this information. Let me just resize the grid a little bit. Email notification. I can email an individual item that's based on the item that's been selected, or I can email them all as a big batch to somebody. I'll give that a go. Let's wait for Outlook to show up, and there's an email message. It's not directed to anyone specifically because we're going multiple vehicle, but there in the body is the nuts and bolts of all those PM items. From this list, I'm going to clear some of this out and do a little bit differently. Pick that vehicle number, generate that list again. And from this list, I've trimmed it down to just 2 items. I can create work orders directly from the generated list. And if I click that create work order button, there's some options. So I can create a single work order for the equipment PM item pair. So what that means is for this selected item, that one with the black triangle. So for unit 1014 and the lube oil and filter, it'll create a fleet work order with just that. Or I can create a single work order for the equipment and all displayed PM items. Or for all work, I can create work orders for everything. So these last two settings in this case are identical. So let's make that selection. Click the OK button, and it's going to try to affirm that, yes, this is really what I want to do. And when I say OK to that, it's created a new fleet work order for us, number 12,911. And if I go to my fleet work orders, fleet work orders, and there's my latest fleet work order. There it is, 12,911. And there are those two items on it right there. And no employee has been assigned yet, but this has been teed up for us. We can now get to work on this. We can say Ned Arcata is doing it, or Charlie Brown's doing this. And, you know, the process is well on its way. Another thing, filtering wise, is that we can look at overdue items, upcoming items only. There's some look ahead thresholds that you can set in the system. Let me just briefly jump to that. There's some look ahead thresholds for PM. You know, if I want to look ahead 300 miles or 50 hours or 10 days based on the intervals that I've set up. Again, these are user defined, customer defined. You can set them up however you wish. Actually getting them set is an admin function. But once if you've got admin rights and you need to manipulate these, it's a very simple process. So, you know, there's a cycle here. So, you know, the workflow, the process, the cycle, you document PM items as serviced in a fleet work order. You keep current with your odometer readings on both fleet work orders and via the fuel log. And then you use the PM schedule to generate a list of services that are due, generate a due list. Now, one thing we didn't point out is if we have a fleet work order, when we're looking at a fleet work order, let's just look at a different one here, like this one we created today. When I click that edit button and come to this row and do a modify or add a new row, there is and forgive me, I should have pointed this out before, but I overlooked it. There's a drop-down list here where we can select the appropriate PM item. So when I say the appropriate PM item, that means that the PM items that are only available for this particular vehicle. I'm working on unit 1014, Chevy 2500, and it only has these two PM items associated to it. So it doesn't allow me to make a mistaken choice. I can't make a choice that's wrong. I can only make a choice that is appropriate. Now, it still might be the wrong choice, but at least I'm not picking something that's really kind of crazy. So using that drop-down list, either doing it by the code or by the name, will make that PM item documented as having been serviced. So I hope that that's kind of clear. There's a feature we have in PubWorks called Fleet Activities. A fleet work order documents labor hours, but those labor hours essentially are on time spent, for lack of a better term, turning a wrench, working on the vehicle directly. But what if you've got employees, fleet mechanics, let's say, that spend their time doing other things like training or shop cleanup? They go to meetings, they have safety trainings, I already mentioned training, they're doing part inventory, they're actually spending time doing data entry into a computer system like PubWorks. So those tasks, instead of artificially tying them to a fleet work order and some fictitious piece of equipment, you might want to use what we call a fleet work order, excuse me, a fleet maintenance activity record. And this activity record, for a lot of customers, can be circumvented by just using a regular activity record, but this one is very much abbreviated. And it lets you enter work performed by an individual, a mechanic, again, it's only going to show me my fleet mechanics. It's not showing me all the other guys and gals who work for the agency. And it's only going to show me the fleet tasks that I set up, the shop tasks I set up. And here's a way for me to document the fact that Ned Arcata, today spent an hour doing data system maintenance. Also today, good old Ned did a training session, and he said he learned how to use the new arc welder. And also today, I set these up before we met, he spent 3 hours in a meeting where the LTAP safety coordinator came down there and showed them some new stuff. So the fleet maintenance activity record, the fleet activity record, is a nice abbreviated way to document work that your people are performing, but not necessarily performing out in the field, on the road network, or in the shop on vehicles themselves. The dashboard, this has been here for about a year or so. We've pushed it out to a lot of customers, but it's a nice data visualization tool. One of the questions today was how this dashboard might be adapted to show parts information. I'd like to talk to that gentleman and then get some more ideas on that, flesh those out. But it's showing us maintenance costs. It's showing us work orders over time. There's a lot of filtering here that you can take advantage of to bring different groups of data into view. Speaking of groups, you can group data by equipment type or by department. That will change the charts a little bit. The data that's being used to create these charts appears in this blue and white grid, and we're summarizing that data over here in blue ink to give you summaries of cost in terms of parts, labor, and total. This can also be used to navigate. You double click on one of those rows, go right to that work order. So here we've got maintenance costs through that time frame on incomplete work orders or all work orders. We've got a display of how many work orders we're performing over time. The second tab is showing us fuel consumption, again over time. Average vehicle age, nice asset management feature. We've got quite a few old vehicles here, don't we? And then vehicle values and vehicle counts. And again, there's filters here. Maybe you just want to look at your road and bridge department vehicles and you'll get a different view of the data automatically. So that's the good old dashboard. Let's take a look at some reporting. I mentioned on the introduction on Tuesday that we don't want to be a store and lose system. You want to put data in, you want to be able to pull it out. It's the way I often term it, it's data in, information out. You're entering data about work performed. You want to pull out information about what that work cost or what needs to be done or how many parts were used. So data in, information out. We looked at some parts inventory reports before, right there, inventory reports. I'm not going to go through them again because we kind of touched on them. We looked at some equipment. I got to go to the right menu item. That would help, right? Equipment replacement reports. Those we touched on briefly. I urge you to explore these, experiment with them. We've got a lot of equipment listing reports. Again, a simple screen, radio buttons, filtering. This is a way for you to extract information out of your system. These reports come with various levels of detail. So let's just take a look at one. I'll look again at my pickup trucks and road and bridge. Over here, make some simple drop-down list selections, click the OK button. And, there's my listing. Now, one of the things that this shows you is a total vehicle value. So again, that kind of nods to one of the asset management capabilities of the system. So what are these vehicles? What do they cost you in original cost? The similar kind of report might be a replacement report for the year 2018. Same idea. So these are more or less like asset management and listing reports, but then there's a whole slew of fleet maintenance cost reports that I should get to. again, radio buttons for selection. Maybe I make a drop-down list selection. Give me a work order detail report for everything we've ever done on unit 10,014 or 1014. And this is going to show me work order by work order, the details of what we've done there. Maybe I want to do a parts and labor summary for that particular vehicle, but just the year 2017, making that year selection at the bottom. And again, it's going to go showing me all the work orders we've done this year, showing me their parts and labor summaries, odometer readings that I may or may not have put in, and the total costs involved. I'm just trying to give a survey of some of the reports that are available. Another report might be, for example, the equipment work order summary, but this time just let me use my filter by department, road and bridge, and I'm going to group it by equipment type. So there's a difference between grouping, again, and filtering versus sorting. So these are three separate and distinct concepts. Grouping is a real global, high-end organization. Sorting is the way records are ordered within the grouping, and filtering is what limits what data flows into the report. So here's a report where I'm grouping by equipment type. And these are very distinct groups. They stand out, hence the term grouping. And there's individual summaries for each group on parts and labor. We're also breaking things out outside and in-house. So that's an important consideration. We're showing how many work orders were actually performed on those vehicles. Get a sense of sort of the workload that's been taken on there. You know, just to turn that on its head, instead of filtering by the road and bridge department, let me filter by equipment type instead to give you a different view. And this time I'll group it by department, and we'll see how we can sort of rotate that report 90 degrees. So here we can see the equipment department grouping and the various vehicles that fall into each of those groups, and the outside in-house costs involved. So it's just a different format, different way of looking at it. Another report we know it's a pretty important report for a customer out in California, the comprehensive summary. And I'll just run that the same grouping. And this is looking at all the vehicles that we've worked on, whether we worked on them or not. But it's also, let me just, a little small, let me push that to 112%. Get the pen out. You know, it's looking again in-house and outside, but it's also analyzing any tires that we might have consumed there, any fuel we might have consumed, oil and lube we might have consumed. It's giving us a cost of use per mile too. So I'm hoping you can see that. So it's a very powerful report. There's some configuration settings that need to take place to make sure that fuel and oil and tires are properly found by the software, but that's an easy thing for our customer support team to help you with. One last report I'll show is the productivity summary. Is that the one I want to show? I'll give it a go. Now I wanted to show the work summary. So the work summary for 2017. You know, this is a listing. It's a pretty simple listing, but it's very informative because it's showing me who's worked on my vehicles, and I ran it for the year 2017. So you can see that Boyer Ford's done quite a bit of work, 30 work orders for us on 20 different units. You know, and Fred Benton's done a great deal of work for us as well. But it shows us how the workload has been distributed amongst our mechanics, both in-house and outside. So I think it's a very nice report. I don't know if you know about it, but now you do. The other report I wanted to show was some of these invoice reports that our customer in Florida uses. So you know, maybe an invoice summary report. And I think we've got some data here for the fourth quarter. Let's see what we get there. There's a markup that you can apply. I'll give it a 10% markup. And that's not the one I wanted. I want the invoice listing. So there's an invoice listing, and it's showing us the various vehicles and they use the invoice number as and the fleet work order number interchangeably. And we can see that this invoice has been paid, and it's showing us parts and labor for that work performed, and it can be used, as a billing mechanism for an outside agency. So lots of reports. Don't really have time to go through them all now, considering how late we're running. Last couple of things I just wanted to show were some setup options that you might want to think about and make sure you're taking advantage of. So from a user powers perspective, off the system menu, again, you need to be an admin user to actually manipulate these settings and grant powers to people. But on the fleet side, it's very important to know that add, modify, and delete are separate powers. Also, that certain sections of the fleet work order can be manipulated independently, if you will. So you can set up a user such that they can only manipulate the labor section of a fleet work order, or just the parts section of a fleet work order, or that they can modify only open fleet work orders. Or you can say that the use of fleet work orders is limited to the logged in fleet mechanic. That's a nice setting, because what it does is it limits that person's view, doesn't clutter up what they see with stuff that's not relevant to them. There's some system-wide settings in fleet that are growing. How do we require that you enter a odometer or meter reading on the fleet work order? And do you enter it when you create it or when it's completed? I think when you have it set so that it's entered when it's completed is a very good choice. Oftentimes it's not known what that odometer reading is when you tee up the work order. In my system, I've turned off repair priority and repair reason, but I would strongly suggest that at least repair reason is used and turned on, but you don't need to do that. But it does provide a bit of granularity and gives you some really terrific reporting power. The setting here that I've got on required date for completed work order. So if you've got a work order and you complete it, the software enforces that it gets a date stamp telling you when you finish that work order off. You've got a duplication warning here, so warn on incomplete work order. So if you created a work order for a particular unit, it's going to tell you you've already got open work orders for that unit, and maybe you shouldn't be creating a new work order. Maybe you should go back to one of those open ones and finish them off. We showed that the fleet work order has a header section and then detail sections. Those detail sections can have their own dates associated with them. But if you want, the fleet work order detail can inherit the date of the header, or it could use the current computer date and time for that. I think that using the current date and time is the best setting for that. There's settings that allow negative quantities to be pushed into your inventory or updated into your inventory. So what that does is it allows you to perform fleet work order data entry without worrying about current inventory quantity as on hand. If you haven't updated your inventory and it starts going negative, do you want to stop the people doing fleet work order detailed data entry from doing what they have to do? Because you can always go back at the end of the day or the end of the week and make those inventory updates, and your inventory quantity as on hand will be fine. So there's some settings there to control that. You can allow negative inventory quantities altogether, or not allow that. You can set a default quantity on the use of parts such that the default is 1, or it can default to blank, and then you'll have to key that number in. I've got my parts on the fly extended information checkbox turned on. So when I enter a part on the fly, a new part the system's never seen before, there's some additional data entry fields I can take advantage of to flesh that part out. To make the system easier for mechanics to use, you can set it up such that only mechanics are being displayed as labor sources for fleet work orders and fleet activities, and I've got those on. I've also got the logged in employee as the default for my fleet work orders. So that person is constantly being pushed into my work order. And then there's these thresholds I talked about, these look ahead thresholds I talked about, and a number of other rather esoteric settings that probably, given that I've been talking for 2.5 solid hours, we could take those up in an individual email or a subsequent webinar or some other forum. So last but not least, I just want to briefly mention some of the features we need to build into PubWorks in the coming months. Mike mentioned yesterday mobile capabilities for part inventory, taking a tablet or smartphone out into your parts room, shooting a barcode and updating inventory quantities with a tablet or mobile device. We want to enhance the PMs to support multiple intervals and also tie them to part kits. We've heard that request for a long time, and we just haven't been able to get to it yet. But part kit, PM item, part linkage would be a really terrific feature. As was brought up today, the dual meter support, we're very close to having that done. And then the parts inventory shop location enhancement, where parts are independent of their shop location, and we don't have to duplicate part numbers, or not duplicate them, but sort of qualify them explicitly. We've got the design worked out for that. We just need to finish up the coding on that. So I'm hoping most of these items, not the mobile item we're probably looking at late 2018, but the other items, the PM multiple interval, the PM part linkage, the dual meter support on fleet work orders, and the parts inventory independence of location. Those are all changes that are in one way, shape, or form in flight, and hopefully first quarter 18, they'll be ready to roll. So I'm out of talking gas. Thanks everybody for attending, and thanks for all those great questions, and I hope this was useful, informative, and helps you going forward.